Welcome to Stranger Things in the 1980s. My name is Vince Locke. I am your host. In this podcast, my guest and I take deep dives into the Upside Down, where we analyze each episode of the Netflix series along with related movies and books, and examine them in the context of 1980s America. The Szilagyis return for this episode, where we discuss 3 Mile Island and Chapter 5, Dig Dug. Hey strangers, Vince here. I just want to let you know that we are now on Patreon. Because this podcast began as a college course, its purpose is to be educational, and I strongly believe education should not be commercialized. That's why you won't find advertisements here. But like most educators, I am overworked and underpaid, which sometimes gets in the way of making the podcast. And that's why I've turned to Patreon. As a patron of the podcast, you'll get access to new episodes 1 week before everyone else, along with bonus episodes exclusively for patrons, which will include movie commentaries, interviews, and discussions of special topics requested by patrons such as yourself. And of course, you'll also get shout-outs in future episodes and the personal satisfaction that comes with supporting education and the people who make content you enjoy. So go to patreon.com/Stranger Things in the 1980s. Now, on with the episode. Welcome back to Stranger Things in the 1980s. I'm your host, Vince Locke. And this time, I'm rejoined by the Szilagyis. So do you guys want to go ahead and remind our listeners of who you are and what you do?
Sure. Hi, I'm Chrissy DeClercq Szilagy. I'm an adjunct professor and historian and history communicator. Hello.
Hi, I'm Jason Szilagy. I also am an adjunct professor and history communicator and Stranger Things enjoyer and definitely an 80s, I would say, fanboy.
Oh, fanboy, you lived it.
That's true. Lived it. Got the nostalgia to it. I know. Going
I did
back
it before.
into
It was cool, man.
Yeah,
exactly.
I mean, I lived it too. I just you were a little bit older, so you remember more of it.
And
true. I'm older than the two of you, so I remember more of that. Even more.
So, there you go.
Jason, you were on the last episode when we talked about Alien.
Yep.
Welcome back.
I think it was. Yeah, I was gonna say. I think it was the Aliens one. That was a very fun episode.
Okay, so this time we're going to be talking about Chapter 5 of Stranger Things, Dig Dug. And as a prelude or lead into that, we're going to talk a little bit about 3 Mile Island. So I guess, Jason, you're going to lead us through this.
Yeah, so 3 Mile Island was a nuclear accident that took place in the United States in March of 1979. And it was during a period where there was a real kind of push and shove over whether more commercial nuclear reactors should be built in order to power different cities in the United States.
Right.
And there had been protests in many different areas. Michigan had several of them, including one in Midland in 1971, where there was an attempt, or at least there was the plan, to put in a small nuclear power plant. And the people in the region didn't want it, protested for months and months, collected signatures, eventually ended up defeating it. But other places in the 1970s continued to build reactors. In the general feeling of it is for some people was that nuclear power was safer, more environmentally friendly than almost any fossil fuel. And so there was the feeling that, if you had these reactors, there would be unlimited energy.
Which, wow,
yes,
did we
or
need
at least
that time.
cheaper
Yeah.
energy.
Yeah.
cheaper
Yeah.
energy. But there was still a lot of, and even today, there's still a lot of pushback against that, because while nuclear energy is in theory cheaper than most other forms, if you do have something go wrong at those plants, you have, in some cases, hundreds, if not thousands of years worth of radioactive materials sitting there, and you're waiting for it to eventually naturally die down. And it's incredibly difficult and expensive to go through the process of cleaning these sites up.
Yeah. In fact, the first reactor that was set up at 3 Mile Island, which I think is funny, they referred to it as TMI, like too much information. So the first one that was set up, that was started up before the one that had the accident, they just shut it down in 2019 successfully. It was the time of this plant is over. It's going to take until 2079, I think I read, or 2097. It's going to take an unreasonably long time to get it completely shut down and everything cleaned up around it, compared to the 40 some odd years that it's been functioning, which is interesting.
Now, just to clarify for our listeners, sorry, there was an accident at 3 Mile Island, but it wasn't a meltdown. I think that's people do get a little confused about that.
What happened is there was a mechanical failure and a valve that was supposed to open to allow for some water to get out of the cooling area. The valves didn't open. You ended up with steam inside the water reactor, not the reactor, the water chamber. Forgive me, I'm not a nuclear physicist. There was I was about to say a small explosion. That's relative, particularly relative, because I have just been rewatching HBO's Chernobyl, which listeners, if you have not seen HBO's Chernobyl, you got to see HBO's Chernobyl, particularly because Vince and I have been talking. We're pretty sure that Chernobyl is going to show up in the next season of Stranger Things. But
yes, I mean, I would be extremely disappointed if it doesn't.
And I don't see how that happening, because I think they're already into April. So it's just, anyway, but so there was this explosion and a lot of radiation that was released. Unlike Chernobyl, there was not the fear of a meltdown. Apparently, and this, again, in looking at stuff about Chernobyl, I found out that when the USSR was putting together the plants like Chernobyl, there was an idea that these could not explode. If you have seen Chernobyl, you'll recall an RBMK reactor does not explode. And so they didn't bother with potential issues for containment. American nuclear plants have not containment like we think of at Chernobyl, where there's a huge dome over it, but the buildings have containment elements. So even if it had done what Chernobyl had done, it potentially wasn't as bad, if that makes sense. But it did end up as a level 5 on the International Nuclear, what's the E stand for? It's an INES scale, which is an accident with wider consequences. It's 5 out of 7 for 3 Mile Island. And we were talking about China incident.
There was just, for listeners who haven't seen the movie, there was a movie that was released only a few days before 3 Mile Island took place.
12 days before. Yeah.
12 days.
Yeah.
China
syndrome.
Yeah, because the idea, the fear behind it was that if there was a reactor, if there was a meltdown or a full-scale reactor meltdown, in theory, the materials could melt their way through the core. And
so there was this idea, and it was fictional, of course, that a nuclear reactor that melts down on one side of the Earth could go all the way through the core and come out on the other side.
Which is, I mean, really impossible for a number of reasons, but that was the idea, the naming of the China syndrome.
And in the movie China Syndrome, they had it where Barbra Streisand is a reporter, Michael Douglas is her cameraman, and
Jane Fonda,
Jane Fonda. Yep, sorry, Jane Fonda. My mistake. Sorry, getting ahead of myself here with different people. But they're in the reactor control room when there is a meltdown that takes place in the plant in the movie, and the nuclear power regulators, or I would say the ones who are pushing to have more of these plants open, they actually protested against the movie, saying that it was fictionalized and that it was, more along the lines of science fiction than anything else. And then all of a sudden,
to use the phrase, the character assassination of an entire industry.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, that's a good phrase.
And Jane Fonda already had a rough reputation, we'll say, when it came to many people in the United States because of her anti-war protests in Vietnam. And so she became, once this 3 Mile Island accident took place, she kind of spearheaded again the idea of protesting against the continuation of building nuclear power plants.
You had mentioned that a lot of people were really uncomfortable with the idea of having a nuclear power plant, especially, not in my backyard, that whole idea.
Always.
Why do you think that people felt so uncomfortable with the idea?
Hiroshima and Nagasaki? I shouldn't laugh. It's not funny, but I mean, it's the obvious answer. There's a lot more to it than that, though.
I'm inclined to agree that, Americans in particular, and I don't know if this is the same in Europe or other parts of the world, but in America in particular, we associate nuclear energy with bombs. And of course, this was really the height of the Cold War, which was only going to get a little bit more hostile once Reagan became president. So, yeah, it was that, probably paranoia is not the right word, but a distrust or an uneasiness about nuclear energy because of the connotations with war.
Yeah, and you have to think too, a lot of these nuclear physicists and these people that are working at these plants and putting these together are people who would have gotten their degrees on the GI Bill and would have been in the war. You're right at that generational spot where you would have had people mid-career who had been in the war. And I think that's going to affect it too. But then again, on the other side of it, it was presented as this like a miracle cure too, because even though we weren't yet at the point where we were actually recognizing that global warming and climate change was going to be what it is, there was an understanding that, hey, smog's a bad thing.
Yes.
Leaded gasoline might be a bad thing. A lot of elements that there was concern about air pollution, that there was an understanding that it was coming from coal-fired power plants and all of the other fossil fuels that are being burned. And so that's one of the reasons the issue was so vehement. It was very much all or nothing. Either it was a miracle cure or it was going to kill us all.
And we're starting to see that sort of happen again. What with, of course, we're dealing with the effects of global warming and climate change now. So there's a more urgent need, I think, to find alternative energy sources. And and cheap energy, especially. If you look at gasoline prices and crude oil prices now, it's really hurting people. So yeah, there is a push now towards, hey, let's re-examine nuclear energy.
Let me take this opportunity to remind your listeners that windmills do not cause cancer. And solar panels are good things. But all joking aside, yeah, this is something that is going to have to be dealt with within our lifetimes, or not, and our lifetimes will be shorter. And that's something, where do you go with that? I'm not really sure. There's so much money in the politics of it.
Yes.
And I think that came in with the nuclear power too. You do have that issue always with this type of major industry. So yeah, 3 Mile Island became synonymous with uncontrolled nuclear power, shall we say, until Chernobyl 7 years later. 5 years later. Wait, 86 or 84? 86.
It was 86, yeah.
Yeah. So 3 Mile Island became synonymous with these kind of uncontrolled nuclear power potential issues, until Chernobyl happened 7 years later. And then everybody who didn't live near 3 Mile Island kind of forgot about it. And it was replaced in everyone's minds with Chernobyl.
And so the nuclear energy advocates were like, hey, see, 3 Mile Island, this is what we've been warning you about. And again, just to clarify, it was an accident. There was an emission of radioactive vapor, but it wasn't a meltdown. But
yes,
like I said, the opponents were like, see, this is what we've been warning you about. And then less than a decade later, you get the massive major meltdown in Chernobyl, Ukraine. So that's just like, see?
Yeah. And of course, 3 Mile Island, once they did finally get into the reactor, they found that it wasn't as bad as they thought it was. But, that was in, I think, 89 or somewhere like that. So it was well after. And of course, what we know now about what happened with Chernobyl, so much of that had nothing to do with the nuclear power and everything that was involved in that, and everything to do with the way the USSR functioned. But I'll talk about that more when we talk about
We will definitely talk about that more.
Forgive me, listeners. I'm supposed to be talking about 3 Mile. Excuse me. We are supposed to be talking about 3 Mile Island, and I go off on Chernobyl. I just finished teaching a class where we watched the series and discussed it, and so it's in my head. Forgive. They do go hand in hand in that way.
Absolutely. And so don't worry about spoiling anything.
Spoilers,
because there is
Chernobyl.
Spoiler. But yeah, that is extremely relevant to the 1980s, relevant to Stranger Things. And there is, you could draw a direct connection between the two. So yeah, it is relevant to discuss Chernobyl. And of course, it's relevant now. As we record this, there is a war. Russia has invaded Ukraine, trying to make it essentially a part of the USSR again, trying to rebuild the USSR, or at least that's what it seems like.
That's
and there has been some threats of nuclear fallout from attacks on the Ukraine near nuclear power plants.
Yeah, both Chernobyl and the other one, the name of which escapes me at the moment. But yeah, there's a lot of concern for that. And right at the beginning of the war, which was a little over a year ago now, they had Russian soldiers digging trenches around Pripyat and Chernobyl, and they were getting sick, and nobody told them why, apparently. And so there's a whole other.
So yeah, you had mentioned how 3 Mile Island became synonymous with the dangers of nuclear energy, but it's also, I think, synonymous with the idea of cover-ups in relation to nuclear energy and sort of government malfeasance, even though 3 Mile Island technically wasn't a government installation. But there's this idea in the popular imagination since then that there is something nefarious that happened there, and that's part of the mythos of what we get into the 1980s with government cover-ups and that sort of thing. It's not it happened not long after the revelations about the CIA experiments and MK Ultra and stuff like that, so people just connect those things.
And you were not that far out from the end of Vietnam at that point. We're not that far out from people remember the Pentagon Papers.
Yes.
All that exposure of that information. And
Watergate.
Watergate is over the whole thing. I was about to say I'm a year off. We're a year off from the Iranian hostage issue. I was going to bring that up, but we're a little ways from that. And there was malfeasance in that people were not. Part of the problem was that people did not recognize the issue with the valve that wasn't opening because of a training issue.
Yeah.
Meaning they had not been trained that was something that could happen. But, there's malfeasance and there's malfeasance, right?
Can you think of any references to 3 Mile Island in pop culture, apart from Stranger Things, which we'll get into?
You would be better at that than I.
Well, yes, I was just going to mention that if you have not seen the movie Wolverine Origins, there's an alternative theory for what actually happens at 3 Mile Island.
Exactly. So yeah, in this X-Men movie, and of course, X-Men is very much an integral part of the Stranger Things sort of world or universe. Apparently that was a prison for mutants, and there was a battle there which resulted in damage to one of the reactors.
Yeah.
Which I think is hilarious.
Yes.
Is that in the comics too? I had, or was that something they did just for the movie?
I'm pretty sure it's just in the movie.
Okay.
I could be wrong, but I don't remember it from the comics.
You'll hear about it from your listeners, I'm sure.
Oh, I'm sure.
That's always how that works.
The first cinematic appearance of Wade Wilson, Deadpool, for anyone who doesn't know about it.
No.
Yeah.
No.
That's okay. At the end of Deadpool 2, he cleans up the timeline. So
yeah,
that is true.
Yeah, that's not real Deadpool. That's something else. Something else entirely.
That's an alternate universe, alternate timeline. Yeah.
Exactly.
I'm trying to think if there's an X-Files, if there's references in X-Files to 3 Mile Island. I feel like there should be if there aren't.
I'm sure there probably is, although nothing really comes to the forefront of my mind.
Yeah.
I was just rewatching Super 8 the other day. I was sort of introducing it to my sisters. And in the movie, there is, on the television, there was a news report about what was happening with 3 Mile Island, which I think they did that in the movie just to really set the time period to let the viewer know that, hey, it's 1979. But of course, when you look at what's going on, the plot of that movie, you can kind of draw a connection there. I mean, I don't want to spoil the movie if you haven't seen it, but draw a connection to the events of the movie and how 3 Mile Island could possibly be a cover-up for what was happening in this movie, that sort of thing. So that's going to take us into Chapter 5, Dig Dug. So what's the connection between 3 Mile Island and Stranger Things?
Nancy relates it to how people talked about 3 Mile Island when they're talking about how they can talk down the story with Will and explain it.
Yeah, and what happened with Barbara and how they could get justice for Barb, right? Which there was that whole social media hashtag justice for Barb, which they're responding
it was
to
Barb,
in
not
the
Will.
second season. Yeah.
So
they want to reveal this conspiracy on the part of the government, Department of Energy, in Hawkins' lab, and they go to the investigative journalist Murray Bauman and explain everything to him. Well, technically, that's what he was. He did.
I know. Yeah.
As an investigative journalist, conspiracy theorist, perhaps it would be a nice way of putting it, who comes up with the idea that the story is so outlandish that the government could very easily squash it. And they developed the idea of watering it down like 3 Mile Island. They say that, well, we can't tell the full story because it's so unbelievable, but if we make it more palatable, we can say that there was some chemical leak from the Hawkins lab, which poisoned Barb and these other people, and the government was trying to cover it up, which kind of is true. It is sort of true.
And certainly there's a long enough history of that kind of thing going on in reality that we know.
Yes.
That it's not anything people would think twice about believing.
It's not unfeasible.
Yes. And then, you look at with Hopper and Will and his mother and his brother having to basically sign non-disclosure agreements, but they would be Will would be taking care of all of his medical needs. And to a degree, he's now almost like a lab animal, because it's the doctors who are associated with the Department of Energy who are reviewing what is going on with him. But he's not able to go anywhere else other than that, and they're not able to talk about any of it with the kids. And for Will, that's got to, it has to be horrifying to a degree, because he's missing this time from his other classmates. And then how do you explain that? In theory, how do you keep the story going about what happened to you, in quotes,
right?
And not have a breakdown over it?
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, there is, we've talked before about, this season is really about trauma, and we see that represented in Will in PTSD. But what's happening to Will isn't just in the past; it is something which is ongoing. So, Dig Dug. What's the reference or significance of the title?
That would be a video game. from back in the day. Basically,
it's all back in the day.
Everything's back in the day. Everything was back on a Wednesday. But Dig Dug was you could find this particular game in an arcade. Eventually, it came to a video cartridge that you could bring it home and play there.
I think I played Dig Dug maybe once. It was not something that I grabbed onto, but I remember seeing it in the spinners at the local video store and then renting Mario.
And it was with Dig Dug and a lot in the Nintendo system. It really was the rebirth of the video game industry, the home video game industry for the United States. And so it is, for quite a few of us, it's kind of a little piece of nostalgia. You didn't have to stand in an arcade which still was awesome. There used to be these things that were arcades where you had all these different arcade boxes of each box was an individual game.
Yes.
Could be two.
Sometimes two.
Sometimes you got Pac-Man and Ms. Pac-Man.
That's true. And you had to pour quarters into them over and over and over again. But the arcades were the place to be. I mean, it was usually attached to a mall or, a strip mall, or they were in a movie theater or a bowling alley. Oh, yeah. You could definitely tell I'm from the 80s.
Yeah, you used to go to some restaurants that had arcade cabinets or even the cocktail table kind of video games.
There's usually a few pinball machines. Pinball was a big one on that. And if you were lucky, it was a place that didn't allow smoking, but that usually didn't matter anyway. There were most places in the 80s.
Yeah, there were many instances where they had the cigarette machine at the front of the.
Oh my God! Yeah, there would be.
Yes, you could buy cigarettes from a vending machine. Yes.
Yeah. I had forgotten about that. People were worried about nuclear energy, but at the same time, cigarettes were in vending machines at eye level for 5-year-olds. So it's fine, whatever.
And kids could buy candy cigarettes. So
yeah, you can still get those. They're hard to find, but you can still get them. They're not labeled quite the same way, and bubblegum cigars.
Yes.
Anyway, you were saying.
So the game of Dig Dug, what's the concept of it?
Basically, with Dig Dug, you are playing a character who is supposed to be going through various levels. You're digging into the ground, and what you're doing is you're trying to find particular power-ups or items, and at the same time, you're avoiding creatures, I guess you could say, that are there to try to stop you. And depending on what you were doing, it could be incredibly frustrating because your controls in this were up and down or left and right. That was it. The cardinal directions. There was no, going off to a side. It was basically you have to be very strategic.
You could box and then go over one and down one, and you kind of made a diagonal line, but it was all squares.
Yeah. So this, these are the days of side-scrolling games, but even before, Mario, which is the classic side-scroller, or Super Mario Brothers, excuse me. Most games you had one screen and you moved around the screen, either going left, right, or up and down. So your movement was very limited. But yeah, Dig Dug is all about digging tunnels in order to find power-ups and score points, and you encounter these monsters, right? So yeah, you had an air pump where if you encountered a monster, you could shove the air pump in it and blow it up. So how does that relate?
Good choice.
How does that relate to this episode?
Hopper's stuck in the ground.
Yes.
Dealing with monsters with not air but fire. But fire needs air. So there you go.
Yeah, that is the big connection here, is that Hopper is essentially playing Dig Dug in real life, going through these underground tunnels and dealing with the monsters. Yes. There's also a more, I think, explicit connection in that Dig Dug is the arcade game that Max gets the high score on, which is how we get introduced to Max and how the boys get introduced to her. And in this episode, Lucas wants to reveal the truth about Hawkins to her, and does that by taking her into the back room of the arcade by putting a sign on Dig Dug saying it's out of order. So there was an explicit reference to Dig Dug in the episode, but yeah, metaphorically, thematically, it's all about what's going on with Hopper.
Yeah, and I totally didn't make that connection until you mentioned it. I was just like, oh yeah, she's playing the game. That's why they called it that.
Mm-hmm.
And
this is why this is an important podcast, listeners. It's connections.
Yeah. And in the 80s, it was deemed unusual to have girls be interested in video games. And it was for the gang in Stranger Things, it was a point of pride for the boys to have the high score in the arcade games. And that's what kind of freaked Lucas out. He was like, who is this?
Yes. And that is mentioned. I'm not sure if it's like directly stated in the first episode, but yeah, they're like, who's Max? Who's this guy? They can't imagine that it's a girl, right? And when they do realize it's a girl, they're like, wow, she's this.
What do we do with this?
Right. She's like the perfect girl, right? She likes boys things. She plays video games. She skateboards.
Yeah.
The other reference that I could get from the video game and the girl playing it is a movie called Night of the Comet.
Okay.
It is a really good 80s movie. It's just a brief synopsis. It's basically these two sisters who end up surviving Halley's Comet. The Halley's Comet orbits through and it ends up destroying the vast majority of humanity.
Notice to listeners, that's not actually what Halley's Comet does.
Exactly. But one of the things is the main character, the older sister, she works at a movie theater and she is playing one of the video arcade boxes there. And she has all 10 high scores until she notices that someone has replaced one of her high scores. And then she's like, who is this? And so it's the same kind of reaction that Lucas had.
Okay.
The shoe is on.
I was wondering what the connection was there.
Yeah.
I'm like, really? Night of the Comet? Okay. I mean, good movie, sure, but.
Well, okay. And so the thing with women in video games too, this is not gone. Okay. Listeners may have recall of, it's probably 10 years ago now, Gamergate, and the whole issue of girls couldn't possibly want to play video games and therefore they could not review them appropriately. I forget the name of the woman and the paper she was writing for, the magazine, but basically this woman wrote a positive review for a video game that people then found out that she had at one time dated a guy who was involved in making the video game. So they immediately used that to say that, see, she couldn't possibly mean that this is a good video game. And then that blew up into a huge misogynistic mess.
Absolutely.
And
the idea that,
like that.
Women don't really play or like video games. They just pretend that they do in order to attract men.
Tell that to, all of us who play any number of games ranging from Animal Crossing. All you have to do is look at, 2020 and Animal Crossing. And that's not primarily women, I don't think, and girls, but certainly there's a lot of more than you see with some other video games. But you look at anybody under the age of 20, give or take, there's girls that grew up playing GTA,
Yes, especially
and stuff like that.
Post 80s, video games were just such a part of culture that, regardless of gender or sex, people grew up playing them and play them now.
Yeah.
But there is still that belief or that stigma that, women aren't real geeks, right? They don't play video games.
Yes, tell that to the women who made sure that Star Trek stayed on air in 1967. But that's, that's fine.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts on this episode?
I thought it was a fun one. Actually,
dark at times, but fun. Yeah.
Yeah. Very, very dark, very suspenseful. Again, the idea that you have Hopper who is essentially alone and no one really knows where he's at. Will eventually goes kind of,
he figures it out.
Yeah, he figures it out. But it's one of those moments where it's like, okay, this is the guy who is the law in the town.
Right.
And he is completely on his own, and he gets into trouble in this one, and it's quite tense trying to figure out what is going to happen. And
he's buried alive, which is
Yes.
like one of those,
Yeah.
when you talk to, like when you see those surveys, people about what their greatest fears are, that's always top 10,
Yeah.
if not top 5.
Yeah.
So that, that's going to hit everybody watching with the chills.
Yeah.
Yes.
But then on the other side of it, you have Dustin running around trying to get the Demogorgon to get into the shed with with salami or bologna or whatever it is.
Right.
So, there's levels.
There is, and the few episodes that precede this one, there's this general sense that they're really slow moving. Yeah, they're entertaining, they're fleshing out the story, but there's not a whole lot that's happening. And now, which is chapter 5, the midway point of the season, now things start moving a bit more swiftly.
But you got to have the setup.
Absolutely.
It drives me crazy when people are, oh, this is so slow. It's like,
character development.
Excuse me. I'm sorry. Yeah, character development. People were complaining about that with Picard season 3. Stranger Things works in the same way, in that it is a story in 10 chapters, or however many episodes are in the season. You would not pick up a novel and read a chapter in the middle of it and judge it by that one chapter.
Exactly.
Somebody might, but they would be wrong to do so. So yeah, you got to get there. You got to.
I mean, there is a certain, I think, mentality or vocabulary that people associate with like television or film that they don't associate with, let's say, a novel. And Stranger Things is very deliberately set up using a novel kind of structure. So I think people do get a little frustrated with that, and that they expect it to be more like, a 2-hour movie where it needs to be moving all the time, and pacing is more of an issue.
I think there's not to make it like this, but I think there is a generational component to that. Those of us that grew up on episodic television that was specifically designed, it had to be episodic because they wanted it to be sold for reruns, and the reruns would not necessarily be run in order, or people would not catch them in order. So you could not have that kind of a continuing story. Serialized, thank you. I was about to say syndicated, but that's the wrong word. You couldn't have that serialized story because it would kill the ratings on the reruns. And so we're used to that. And I say that I am fully of that generation of being used to that kind of episodicness, to the point that there are shows where you watch it and it's annoying because you remember character growth that then doesn't show up afterward.
Right.
And then you have stuff like Golden Girls. You reuse the same actors for different characters at times, and then you're like, well, wait, that was that other guy, and you can't do that when it's serialized, and I feel like that's better in that case. But yeah, I think, again, people who grew up on the stuff like Stranger Things, where it is more serialized, and that really started coming up in like probably mid-aughts or so, and
especially,
they're more used to that.
Especially, I think, in the past 10 years with the rise of streaming, where people do have the advantage, both writers and viewers, of following one story over many episodes.
And knowing that people are not going to just see an episode at random. And you're going to intentionally sit down and binge it, or, catch it as it's being released, but it's not random.
Now, you had mentioned what was going on with Dustin in this episode, and this introduces the relationship between Dustin and Steve, which surprised me at just how much I love that relationship. Steve was my least favorite character from the first season because he was such a douchebag. And then here we start seeing him in a more positive way, but also just in a fun way.
Yeah. I'd argue he was less useful than a douchebag, but that's another issue. At least that has utility. Right. Anyway, but and Dustin just takes control. Dustin's just like, no, this is what we're doing. And Steve doesn't know what to do with that. It's, okay. I guess we're going to go do this thing. Okay. Take the flowers, throw them in the trash. It's all right.
I mean, it seems like such an unlikely pairing, but it works so well. And one thing I do like about the show, and especially at this point, is you start to see more pairings like that as the show goes on.
You got the ongoing Nancy and Jonathan too.
Yeah.
Which is always that, in opposition to Steve and how all of them interact and the potential for romances and all of that.
Yes. Yeah, you still have those sort of three separate storylines for the three different groups of characters, but now we're starting to see a little bit more pairing off of different characters. And of course, as new characters get introduced, you see how they get connected with our other characters. So in this episode, there's a focus on Lucas and Max, for example. And I love how when Lucas explains what's going on and what happened to Max, what happened with Will and 11 and the whole previous story, Max's reaction is, well, I really liked it, but I thought it was a little derivative in parts. I just wish it had a little bit more originality, which is exactly the reaction critics had to the first season of the show. I thought that was a nice way of calling that out.
Which, that's what it's supposed to be. That was the intent.
Yes, absolutely. It is supposed to be, well, derivative's not the right word, but an homage to the 80s and the books and movies of the time. So yeah, it was deliberate, but yeah, I just loved how that reaction was like, yeah, that's exactly the response to the critics.
I didn't realize that was why they had thrown that in there. That's great.
I don't know if that's the reason why they did. I think that it works as a response to the critics.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Either way.
Yeah.
If they didn't, it's even better because it's some kind of like, they were ready for it. So
right. Something else which struck me about this episode is Will is the spy that 11 was supposed to be, because Will and Mike are talking about how Will can be a spy for them to know what the evil force is doing and what it wants. And then Will does say, well, what if he decides to spy on us? Foreshadowing. But that idea does go back to the first season, because 11 was kind of created in part to be a spy. She was being taught how to do remote viewing on Russians and report back on what they were doing.
Yeah.
But she never really worked out that way as intended. Whereas Will really is working out that way. He is the spy that 11 was supposed to be, and completely
but without
by
the training.
accident. Exactly.
Yeah. And it's breaking him because he doesn't have the training.
Yeah. And the thing too that I really kind of noticed in this season in particular, the relationships between everyone have changed in that group.
Yes.
With the tight-knit group, again, Will is having a incredibly hard time fitting back in, and Mike is trying to kind of get him out of his shell, and letting him know that you don't necessarily have to be a victim of this. You can use this to our advantage to figure out exactly what is happening. But like with Lucas and Dustin and Will, it's kind of not the same.
Right.
You don't see them interacting together as much as, it's like we rescued him, we brought him back, we kind of want to go back to normal. And Will really is, he is connected to this other realm, this other world, that there is something coming. And even though, we may say like Dungeons and Dragons, even though we've gone through this particular adventure and we finished that out, this is a long campaign.
Right. That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah.
And I think you make a good point about how Mike is very much trying to help Will, which Mike is probably my second least favorite character, because he is such a brat, so selfish. But you make a good point in this, but especially in this episode, he is trying to be supportive and helpful of Will.
Yeah. And it just, you're sitting there, I almost, with Mike, he's grasping too at straws to try to kind of keep everybody together. And to a degree, he's suffering PTSD as well because, 11 was she's there and then she's gone.
That is a good point.
Trying to kind of rebuild some sort of relationship. And you do have, Lucas focusing in on Max. He's interested with the fact that she likes the video games, but it's like he's at the point where he's like, oh, I'm noticing girls.
Yes, which becomes more of an issue in the third season, which we will talk about then. The sort of onset of adolescence and moving into being a teenager.
And it's fun to watch this because you actually do get to see the development because they go back to school, and now it's not just Will who has to carry this story, a fabricated story of what happened. It's also all of his friends and family who have to do the same thing.
Yes.
And with Lucas actually reaching out to Max, this is the first time they're really kind of bringing other people in.
Yes.
And you're waiting to see what the reaction is going to be.
Yeah.
Along with Bob, this is also the episode in which Bob is told or learns what's going on.
Yes.
It's, as we've just been talking about this here, I realize that there's an analogy with dealing with illness, with I would say particularly like something drastic or terminal, because you have the different ways that people react, and you have, if Will is the one who is sick, then Mike is the person who is all in. Anything this person needs, I'm going to try to make it work. He's going to get pulled away from it because of other things, but that's where he's at right now, right? Dustin is trying to just deal with everything else in the world, okay? And he's not ignoring by any means what's going on with Will, but he also has other things going on, and so he can't give it his full focus. Yes. Lucas seems to be just like, I don't know how to deal with this. And anybody who has had the experience of finding out that someone you love is sick, those are all legitimate reactions, and then you have Max coming in and you have Bob coming in, and Bob actually comes at it from a medical point of view where he's like, you don't look healthy. He doesn't look healthy. Where you have these people coming in and maybe they're aware of the group, they are tangentially related to this group or this family, and then they end up getting thrown into this, and they didn't necessarily anticipate that happening. And so then they have to react to it too. And disbelief is very common as a step in dealing with terminal illness and ongoing illness. So there's a whole like other analogy here, which you could probably relate to the 80s and AIDS as well.
I was just going to say that. Yeah, I think you're exactly right, because in a previous episode, we had talked about what was going on with Ryan White and AIDS at the time, and how we can see a parallel between what's happening with Will, the zombie boy here. So I think you're dead on with that. Something else you had mentioned, Jay, about the idea that they're just growing up and how that is affecting Will and how they're kind of growing apart. That is referenced in the Halloween episode, in which they're the only ones who dress up in costume for Halloween when they go to school. And they're like, why? Last year, everyone dressed up. What's going on now? Why are we the freaks here? And there seems to be the sense that, they're trying to recreate or hold on to their childhood a little bit longer, and they just can't because the world is moving on without them or moving forward.
Yeah, and that's so interesting compared to the modern day, with a lot of this, and maybe it's because it's the people who were kids then are now middle-aged, and so they are picking up on the things that they wanted to continue and couldn't. But I mean, now everybody dresses up for Halloween,
it is kind of weird now. That's it's not weird for adults to dress up, or even older kids to dress up for Halloween and celebrate.
I mean, I remember there being a time in my life where it was like, okay, I'm not old enough to go, or I'm too old to go trick-or-treating, right?
Yeah.
But I have a little sister and there's 10 years between us. So I got to like extend that because I was like, oh, I'll take her. She's the one who's trick-or-treating. I'm just with her. You don't have that anymore. You just have people who go out. You get older teenagers who are trick-or-treating. And it's like, yeah, that's great. Why not? What's that harming anybody? Give them some candy. Yeah. Could they go out and buy their own? Of course they could, but that's not the point.
Exactly.
It's the fun of it, and it's the community of it too, which is
you're not too old to do certain things anymore.
Yeah. And I love that. For positive things. There's some things that you kind of go, you're old enough to know better, but that's a thing. That's a whole other issue. So
the idea of holding on to your childhood, a lot of the pop culture things that are, the video games, the movies, the comic books, the books, the toys that are, the t-shirts that are coming out, and continuing to be, who would have thought, who would have thought something like the Super Mario Brothers movie, that there would be a Super Mario Brothers movie released 40 years after, or 35 years after the NES game came out.
I just watched the second Sonic the Hedgehog movie the other day.
I'm sorry.
It wasn't that bad.
I haven't seen either, but I did not hear good things.
I haven't seen the Super Mario one yet. I hear good things about it.
It's so wonderful.
I've got a low tolerance for entertainment anyway. I just want to be entertained. As long as it does that, I'm going to like it.
Yeah.
So I tend to like things that other people don't, but
there's nothing wrong with that. It's
to the point
we all need brain candy.
Right.
Yeah.
To the point that, these things that came out of the 80s and 90s are being celebrated now. I mean, Stranger Things, the whole idea of Stranger Things is, it does appeal to nostalgia a little bit, but it does reflect the idea that you're not too old for these things anymore.
Yeah, and I think there's an element there that is different from previous generations because, just to go back further than necessary, the concept of childhood, is only a few hundred years old.
It's a very modern idea.
Yeah, as opposed to like, okay, you're shorter than everyone else and you haven't fully developed, but we expect you to act like adults. And then as soon as you can hit adulthood and act like it, you put all those things aside.
Yes.
Now we have our generation. We're Xennials, elder millennial, however you want to put it, Jay and I. He's the end of Gen X. I'm beginning millennial. Our generation had these elements that were very much, when we were children, we were told this is for children. This is for now. You are not supposed to take this into your adulthood. Well, then we went to college and we were still playing Nintendo. We were maybe playing, GoldenEye instead of Super Mario Brothers, but we were still playing Nintendo. And then
or Mortal Kombat or Doom.
GTA, Mario Kart. I can go on. But
so the video games did grow with us.
Yes.
But we still went back to the old ones too.
Yes, that is true.
We still did. Mario Maker would not have sold anything if our generation had not wanted to go back to that. And when I'm talking generational, I understand I am making generalizations about generations, listeners. I know that there's oddball, but, and I shouldn't say oddball, there's exceptions that prove the rule. There weren't things like that before. My mother always wanted to share with me the Marx Brothers, and I love sharing the Marx Brothers with her, and it's great. That's something from her childhood because her parents were watching it, not because it was geared toward children. It just was there.
Yes.
So what our generation is carrying, what we had from our childhood into our children, and you have this, you see, like all of this, the Star Wars that is geared toward kids. We have, I always go back to Star Trek. We have Star Trek Prodigy, which is the first Star Trek show that is genuinely geared toward kids. And it is right there for the people who grew up on 80s and 90s Trek, who have kids that are the right age to appreciate that now. And I know because I've talked to them all over the place.
I watched Prodigy. It's a really good show.
It's wonderful. It's not just for kids by any means. I highly recommend it. You gotta get through a first few episodes. It feels very kid-like, but then you get into the track stuff. But so you have this situation there, and where our generation can then celebrate the things of their childhood with their kids alongside them. And it's not just, they're not going back to it just because, oh, my kids like it.
Right.
The way that our parents might have taken us to see, I don't know, The Lion King and enjoyed it, but maybe felt a little guilty about it, or maybe felt like this isn't for me, know. But now it's just like, okay, family, we're all going to go see the Mario movie. We're going to get different things out of it, but we're all going to enjoy it. And, then we're going to go home and play Mario.
Yeah, play Mario.
It's a different mentality entirely.
It is.
And I love it. I think in some places there might be some overcorrection for all of the millennia of human history that we didn't recognize childhood, but that's yet another topic for discussion.
There's a whole other dissertation on that.
Yeah.
Something else that kind of stood out to me about this episode is the way they use like corporate logos and product placement. And we've always gotten that to a certain extent. Like in the previous season, it was all about the Egos, right?
Mm-hmm.
They kind of lean into that a little bit more this season, especially in this, or at least in this episode, I really noticed it because they really focus on corporate logos to a greater extent, I think, than they had previously. So, for example, Cheetos. We see Cheetos at several points throughout this particular season. And in fact, attention is drawn to it by Keith, the arcade guy, who hands a bag of Cheetos to Max. Hold these while he unlocks the door to the office. We get references to Dunkin' Donuts in this episode. The Peterbilt truck logo, I don't know why, but they focus on that a little bit longer than they probably should for some reason. I mean, with something with like Ego, it makes sense to the story, but also it makes sense why, in terms of product placement, they can get some funding from the company that makes Egos.
Oh, yeah.
So there is that sort of cross-promotion aspect going on there.
Yeah.
Peterbilt, I don't know why Peterbilt would pay for product placement in this, but yeah, the truck that 11 is riding in to her mom's house, it focuses on the logo for that a little bit too much. There, we see a sign for Tuborg Gold in Murray's house, a neon sign. And then, and this threw me off. This is what I noticed in my rewatch today. When he is pouring vodka, there is a close-up on the label, and it looks exactly like the Stolichnaya label, and that's what I thought it was. Today, when I watched it, I realized that it's not. It is Slotichnaya, which is a parody of Stolichnaya. I never caught that before, and I wondered why that was. And I looked it up, and apparently it's a reference to Minority Report, the movie version of it with that Steven Spielberg made. Apparently, and I can't confirm this, but I've seen several postings online that refer to it as being a reference to Minority Report. So another Steven Spielberg connection going on.
Nice. I just assumed they couldn't get the okay from Stoli.
That's what I would have thought.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, a reference to, Russian vodka, since vodka is supposed to be the drink of the Soviet Union, and the fact that you have it, Americans going through the process of drinking it as well,
And that was the connection I was making, is that, Murray is kind of un-American, and that he's digging into these government, cover-ups and that sort of thing. Well, of course, he's a commie. He's going to be drinking vodka, right?
I was going to say, isn't he supposed to be a communist? I remember that.
Some recurring themes in this episode, or motifs. Numerology comes back around. We saw that previously earlier in the season when, for example, the CB channel that Hopper uses to communicate with 11 is channel 11. And then we learn that, 11 has been gone a certain number of days. I can't remember exactly, but if you add the numbers together, it comes out to 11. So we get little numerological references to that. And we get it here in this episode because her mother lives on 515 Larrabee, and 515, when you add them together, is 11.
Yeah.
And then Murray lives in 3833. That's his house number. They really focus on it. They really feature that number very prominently, and I don't know why, because I don't know what it heads up to. It's got to be a reference to something, but I'm not picking up on what it is. So any ideas about that one?
11 and 6.
Right.
Or 17. I don't know on that one.
Yeah. Yeah. So like I said, it's got to be
know.
reference to something. I don't know what it is. So, any listeners who can point that out to us or explain that, please let us know. The theme of trust is referenced again in this episode when Max says to Lucas, "I'm supposed to just trust you."
Mm-hmm.
And then when 11 goes to her mother's house and her Aunt Becky kind of turns her away, 11 uses her powers to open the front door, which recalls Will's vision in the first episode of this season, where the shadow creature opens the door to his house too. So
that whole thing with her mother is just heart-wrenching.
Yes, it is. Some allusions in this episode. Wheel of Fortune is referenced, not the TV show itself, but the board game based on the TV show. We see that in Dustin's house. Aliens is kind of indirectly referenced. And I think we talked about this in the previous episode when we talked about aliens. Kelly Coffey had mentioned in that episode that when Dustin tries to get Dart into the cellar, he puts on the hockey gear and it looks like the power loader from Aliens. And I'm like, yeah, it absolutely does.
Good
so
catch.
And of course he kicks Dart into the cellar just like Ripley kicks the alien out of the airlock. I'm like, oh, that's a nice reference there.
Yep. Yeah. Slams the door shut, and it doesn't really solve the problem, but
it doesn't. But yeah, a nice visual reference to aliens there. Masters of the Universe is referenced. We've seen Masters of the Universe figures a few times in the show. In this episode, Lucas's sister Erica is playing with his He-Man and Merman figures. And then we will, I think, see that in the next episode as well. Family Feud is referenced. That's what Eleven's mother is watching on television. Possibly a little bit of foreshadowing. We'll see when we later on. Temple of Doom is visually referenced, and we see visual references to Temple of Doom in a few places throughout this season. In this episode, Hopper grabs his hat when escaping the tunnels.
Yeah,
Goonies is kind of referenced. Well, of course, we get the major Goonie reference in Sean Astin.
Yeah.
Mikey from that movie. But, it is Sean Astin who solves the map puzzle to find X. What's at the X? Buried treasure, which, obviously a reference to the buried treasure, the pirate treasure of Goonies. In this case, the X represents where Hopper is. So buried treasure, I suppose.
Yeah. And then the group of adventuring kids and bringing, like in Goonies, it's all boys. And then all of a sudden you have you have outsiders coming into the group that they're incorporating, and you're seeing that.
Yeah. And Goonies, spoiler, a big part of the adventure takes place underground.
Yes.
And underground tunnels. Yeah. Video games are referenced, and we've seen the same references before. We get arcade cabinets or posters for Asteroids, Pac-Man, Galaga, Q*bert, of course, Dig Dug. We see that in the arcade.
Yeah.
Road Warrior is referenced because the name that Max uses for her high score is Mad Max. And so Keith, the arcade guy, calls her Road Warrior. Road Warrior, of course, being the second Mad Max film. And then Quest for the Space Knife, which really confounded people, especially when the show was first streaming, because there's an arcade cabinet for Quest for the Space Knife. And people were like, what game is that? It's not a real game. One of the set designers for the series has a band called Space Knife. So he will insert little references to that in different places in different episodes. So that's a nice little Easter egg.
I like that.
Anything else that you caught?
I would definitely say Aliens plays a big chunk, especially in Temple of Doom with Hopper, because he's, he only has his torch, and as he's cruising through,
Yes.
Spoiler alert.
Oh, the torch. I didn't even think about that. Yeah, of course.
Mhm.
Total Indiana Jones.
Yep. And you really like kind of all the adult characters. Hopper's kind of the one that you really attach to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because he's the everyman. He's pretty much what you would, you'd hope to be in a situation like that. He's willing to definitely step out of his comfort zone to try to figure out what is going on and help whoever he can. And so when you're seeing him alone in this tunnel, it is really, and he gets into some issues. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, no spoilers, but when you see it, you're sitting there like, oh my God, we can't lose this guy.
This looks bad for Hopper. Yeah. I don't think I've made any secret is my favorite character out of everyone here. But yeah, he's also shows how resourceful he is.
Yeah.
And we talked about that a little bit before in the first season, where when we first meet him, he kind of comes off as that sort of cop who's just like trying to make it to retirement and doesn't really care about anything, bad at his job, but he's actually really good at what he does.
Yes. And the case of trying to find Will and finding 11, it brings him around.
It does.
He hits the point where he has something else to focus on other than himself, or the self-destruction of himself.
Yes.
Well, and as we learn later, the loss of his daughter and the dissolution of his marriage and everying.
Yeah.
So it gives him something to live for.
Yeah, exactly.
Also points out the importance of the fact that he was smoking, because he had this lighter. If he hadn't been a smoker, he wouldn't have had the lighter.
That's a good point. And we saw him smoking in the first season. I don't know if we see him smoke in this season. I don't remember.
Not sure off the top of my head.
Yeah,
but,
I don't.
Because didn't 11 get on him about that? Or is that later? That might be later.
It might be later. I don't remember.
Yeah.
In this season, he does seem to be a bit healthier, both mentally as well as physically.
Yeah.
But yeah, good point. He has a lighter. Not many people carry lighters anymore.
No.
I mean, it used to be even non-smokers would carry lighters with them.
Yeah, because it's just polite.
Yeah. To have it. Well, back in the day, again, in the 80s and earlier, you had the restaurants. You had smoking and non-smoking sections.
Yes.
And a business card was a matchbook.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which you picked up from them for free because you bought cigarettes out of the vending machine in front of the restaurant.
Exactly. Yeah. Matchbooks were free. And they would have company logos on them. Yeah.
Yep.
Some of the music this episode gets kind of obscure. Nothing like real obvious sort of chart toppers in this one. So we have Carol Lloyd's Try My Love from 1967. That's what's playing in the motel when Jonathan and Nancy stop to get a room. A double room.
Yes, that was a hilarious scene where the woman behind the counter just completely ignores about
get Carl Weathers, who I did not know made music. Carl Weathers, the actor.
Yeah. I was wondering if that was the same guy.
It
Sorry,
is.
I didn't talk over it.
No, that's fine. It is. Apparently, he was a musician first before he became an actor. And so we get his song, You Ought to Be With Me from 1981. That's what's playing in the Sinclair household when Lucas asks his dad about, how do you apologize to mom or make things up to mom?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Nice little domestic scene. I think that's probably the second time that we've seen Lucas's parents, but I like them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah. And they seem much more functional together than Mike's.
Certainly more than that doesn't take much.
Yes.
Oh, no, it doesn't. But I liked how Lucas's dad was like, she's not wrong. It was like, okay.
Yeah,
as
she's
opposed
never
to
wrong.
Yeah, Mike's dad, who's like, my children don't live here anymore.
We do get that contrast in this particular episode. This is where we get that classic Dustin line about how you're useless. Son of a bitch, you're useless, aren't you?
Yep. I would think a good reference too with Carl Weathers is that most people, would remember him as Rocky's opponent.
Yep,
Sylvester
Apollo
Stallone's
Creed.
opponent. Yep. Apollo Creed in the movies, but he had a couple of other movies in the 80s. He had Action Jackson, where he was the sole star, set in Detroit.
Yeah.
Fun movie if you haven't seen it, but also Predator.
Predator comes a little bit later after this season, but yes, definitely.
Yeah. But he started to come into that because he was supporting actor with Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
so he was regarded as an action hero. Not quite at the same level as Schwarzenegger or Stallone, but still up there. Yeah. Which is why it surprised me so much that he was a musician.
Yeah. That's the thing, is like, I would not have thought that would be the case, but hey, that's actually pretty awesome.
Or, of course, or it would be like serious metal band or something, like how it's so confusing that Christopher Lee has a metal band. Had a metal band, excuse me, when he was still alive.
Yes. Of course, Carl Weathers, I think most people recognize him now from The Mandalorian.
Exactly.
Yes, of course. I forgot about that.
Yeah, so it's kind of nice that he's, you're getting him in, to a degree, almost every decade from the 70s
pretty much.
onwards.
I mean, in the 90s, he was working with Adam Sandler.
Yeah.
I had forgotten about that too. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just it's
I forgot about Adam Sandler.
It is very fun. That's what I love about Stranger Things, is it's like it, obviously it's supposed to be the love letter to the 80s, but it's like there are so many small little things that kind of come in there where it's like you should, a lot of people would be able to recognize a different aspect.
Yes.
For each reference.
It's interesting that you put it that way, because it gives a connection to people who may not necessarily think of how influential a previous era is. Like Jay and I are not good people to ask about this, because we are ingrained to think of how do previous events affect today. That's just our, our training and our exactly. So that's just how we think. But, you could see somebody who isn't geared that way watch this and go like, oh yeah, you know what, Family Feud still exists.
Yes, it does.
It's had 15 different hosts. Wheel of Fortune still exists. Hubert, you can play Hubert on your phone, and Carl Weathers, and there's all these connections that may prompt people to think of that and start thinking in that way.
And as we talked about with 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl, how that's still relevant today. So everything that, well, not everything, but a lot of the things that Stranger Things touches on is still relevant today. It's one of the brilliant things about the show.
It's so good.
A couple other songs featured. We got Shock Therapy, Can I Do What I Want from 1985. I wasn't familiar with this band. This is the song that plays when Jonathan and Nancy make it to Murray's place. Like I said, I wasn't familiar with this. I looked it up online, and actually I really dig the song. So if you haven't listened to it, give it a try. Hitman Metal Sports from 1984. Again, another band I wasn't familiar with. This is what's playing on Billy's car stereo. And then we get Billie Holiday's No More, 1944. This is what Murray puts on when he's thinking.
Yes.
Yeah.
So some really obscure stuff. Probably the Billie Holiday would be the best known song in this particular episode. But the other stuff, wow. Yeah, Carl Weathers especially, wow.
Just I want to know what that I would love to see, to have been a fly on the wall for the conversation with him. Like, we'd like to license this piece of music that you did 40 years ago. People don't associate this with you anymore at all, but here it is.
Probably didn't have the same impact that the Kate Bush song had from this past season. Still, it's allowing people to be reintroduced to these artists.
Which is needed with Billie Holiday. Not that the others aren't, but Billie Holiday's forever. Since you brought it up, I just want to take a moment to say that Max's brother's a terrible person, and will continue to be.
Yes.
And we'll leave it at that.
Yeah,
But because I know there's other stuff that happens. But
yes, there is other stuff that happens.
I
and
hate
we'll
him.
come back around to that. But yeah, we are really set up to not like him in this season.
Yeah. Because you're like, he's already a jerk, and he's racist too. Okay.
Yep.
All right, that's fine. And apparently abusive, which I guess
he's racist, he's abusive, he's misogynistic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I had to.
That's fine. That's fine.
He's the total 80s bad kid package all wrapped.
Pretty much. Yeah. This stereotypical 80s bad guy from the 80s movies. He's I can't think of the character's name from the Karate Kid, who's one of the leads on Cobra Kai now. So many characters in 80s movies like that, though.
Yeah. There's an interesting element to that too, because there are 80s movies where you have adults who act like that's perfectly acceptable, that it's not pointing them as the villain. But for younger people to act that way, it's like you're young enough to know better.
Yeah.
To
there
turn
you go.
a phrase, which is very interesting. I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah. William Zabka, who played Johnny in Karate Kid.
Johnny. There you go. Yeah. Yep. I knew the actor's name. I just couldn't think of the character's name. Yeah. Johnny.
Sweet the leg.
Sweet the leg.
I hear Johnny and I just hear Barbara
from
Night of the Living Dead. Johnny has the keys.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
Yes.
Yep. Okay, so those are my notes for this episode. Is there anything else that you noticed or wanted to talk about?
We touched on the stuff with 11 and her mother, and I know that there's more to that, as we go forward. So of course that's where you're going to focus on it. But it's heart-wrenching, and it is anybody who has had a situation where you have someone who's mentally ill in the household, and you have you kind of don't know what to do in this situation. It's like she's kind of catatonic almost. Not quite, but almost. And that is a very, very difficult thing to be in that spot where maybe things aren't so bad, or you are not in a position to get this person put in a home, or it's just not quite, you can't afford it or whatever.
Right.
But at the same time, there is this caregiving aspect and this love aspect, and this aspect of, I remember who this person was. And that hits me hard because I dealt with that in my family. And it's just, I don't know, I had to bring it up and the way she connects with her is very, and you get that story.
Very poignant.
So good. So good. Yeah.
And even 11's interaction with the truck driver who gives her the ride.
Oh, yeah.
When he asks how long has it been, and before she shuts the door, he says, tell your mama you love her.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And
you're sorry.
Yeah, you could see that something happened to him. And there's you'll never know what that story is, but it's something that he's carrying, and he wants to be able for her to kind of have that closure.
There's little stories in there.
Yeah.
And there's a friend of mine on Twitter who does what he calls micro treks, and their little Twitter. You follow me on Twitter, you may have seen me retweet it. Listeners, the Goddess Livia on Twitter, you can see that. But he, in this season of Picard, has picked up on moments that you could tell there was just another scene that could have been there. And I love that, where there are these moments with that, because that truck driver has this story that somebody could pick up on and do like a short story. It's attached to it. And the woman running the motel, I mean,
she's seen some stuff.
Yeah. Listeners, that's my cat, Gus. Hello. He has things to say about Stranger Things.
Yeah. He would like to bring up the fact that
yes, he was very disappointed, very saddened by the death of Dustin's cat.
Yes.
Yeah. What happens with Muse?
Yeah.
Perfect timing there, dude.
And that is another connection to Alien and Aliens, is the fact that you have a cat. And then for Aliens, Ripley's like, you're staying behind, you little shit. And cat is not involved in the second movie.
And rightly so, because that was just scary.
Yes. And we will probably talk about that a little bit more in the next episode, which really brings the Aliens vibes. So the next episode, your homework, listeners, is Chapter 6, The Spy. So some fun stuff happening there. So, anything you want to finish saying or promotes, such as where people can find you online?
Well, I did mention on Twitter at the Goddess Livia, as long as Twitter remains Twitter. We were saying that for a long time, and I think it's just going to kind of go on. And then if you like hearing our voices talking about historical things that are a little more scripted, you can listen to our podcast. It's History with the Szilagyis, and that's twice weekly. We've had a bit of a hiatus because our semester was crazy, but we'll be coming back with that by the time this drops. We'll have come back with that, I think, next week or so. So listen to us there, available on all your favorite podcasting platforms. That's the word I'm looking for. And then you've heard me mention Star Trek a number of times. So if you're into the new Trek, listen to a show called Infinite Diversity. That's a show I do with a friend of mine, Thad, and then we always have a guest on and talk about each new episode of Trek as it comes out. So that's on a bit of a hiatus too, but Strange New Worlds.
Strange New Worlds,
and a half.
Season 2.
Yeah.
And you can find me on Twitter at Jason Dark Elf. As you could tell, kind of a reference to Dungeons and Dragons and all sorts of other fun stuff. So,
yes, he won't plug it, but I will. His Warhammer miniatures that he posts up there are absolutely fantastic.
Really awesome.
Enjoy Warhammer miniature painting, you must follow him because they're awesome.
Yes,
I'm biased, but they're still awesome.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think that'll do it for this episode. So thanks for listening. Thanks, Szilagyis, for joining me again.
Thanks for inviting us. It's fun.
Anytime. And as always, take it easy, take care, and stay strange. Stranger Things in the 1980s is produced by Dread Pirate Productions. Cover art is by Sherry Archer. The theme music is Cobalt by Alex Bloxam, used under license from Filmstro. You can support this podcast, ask questions, or give topic suggestions by going to patreon.com/Stranger Things in the 1980s.